plates crashed behind me, and my spine answered tonight. 6 hours on my feet. Luna Verdi felt endless. River North glittered outside, but I stayed hidden inside. My uniform pinched, damp from steam and worry always. I kept smoothing black fabric over my belly carefully. 4 months pregnant, and I still served smiling anyway. Every step sent heat down my swollen ankles again. I swallowed nausea, pretending the air was fine too. I thought of Eli, tucked into Mrs. Lane's couch. He was 6-year-old brave, but he missed me badly. Rent waited, groceries waited, school shoes waited 2 monthly. Tips were my math, and fear was interest compounding. Jenna Ruiz brushed past, balancing glasses like miracles tonight. She signaled the corner booth, the VIP one again. I heard her warning without hearing the words fully. VIP meant patience required, mistakes punished, faces remembered forever. Marco would glare, and my paycheck would shrink fast. I grabbed menus, breathing in Chandelier's warm glow quietly. The dining room looked like a magazine cover still. White cloth, polished silver, laughter soft as velvet everywhere. I walked with my gaze lowered, trained by survival. The corner table hid behind a column of roses. I stopped because the world suddenly changed shape there. A charcoal suit filled the seat across from her. My hands tightened on menus until leather creaked loudly. Damian Volkov sat there, like he never left me. Not my Damian, but the city's quiet ghost now. I remembered his penthouse windows and private mornings suddenly. I remembered silk dresses, champagne, and permissionless safety once. Then I remembered blood, and the night I ran. Across from him sat a woman in crimson tonight. Sloane Mercer, perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect smile too. Her ring flashed, and my throat tightened instantly hard. Diamond light scattered like broken glass across linen there. I stared at her hand, then at his again. Those fingers once held mine, steadying my shaking heart. Now they rested on hers, calm and possessive always. I caught cedar cologne drifting from his collar close. It dragged me backward, into rooms I feared remembering. I tried to inhale, but air felt sharp now. Somewhere Jenna moved, and the kitchen clanged on behind. Here, my body froze, loyal to panic only today. I told myself to step back and vanish quietly, but my shoes stuck to carpet like guilt still. I watched Sloane tilt her head toward Damian softly. She looked adored, like she belonged beside him already. I caught one word in my mind. Honeymoon planned. That single idea cut deeper than any argument ever, because it meant he had replaced my whole life, and it meant he could replace me again easily. I hated myself for noticing how handsome he was. I hated him for knowing I would notice anyway. My palm slid to my belly, protective reflex activated. Under fabric, the bump felt like a secret alive. I had promised myself Damian would never learn this. Not until I was far. And Eli safe too. I remembered signing daycare forms with shaking hands alone. I remembered selling my wedding bracelet for $500 cash. I remembered whispering apologies to Eli at bedtime nightly. My throat burned with the taste of humiliation tonight. This room adored Damian, and it ignored me completely. I was just a waitress, carrying plates and shame. I had practiced invisibility like a second language daily, yet the spotlight found me the moment I arrived. I forced my lips into a professional smile barely. My voice tried to rise, but fear swallowed it. I could feel sweat cooling under my collar slowly. I wished Jenna could rescue me with a switch. I wished my life had stayed ordinary and small. But ordinary never survived Damian, not for long either. I watched him lift his eyes, finally impatient now. At first, his stare passed over me blankly cold, like I was furniture, like I was air here. Then recognition struck, and his pupils widened too fast. His face stayed calm, but color drained anyway quickly. I felt my heartbeat slam against my ribs hard. My mind screamed run, but my knees trembled first. Damian's gaze dropped, not to menus, but lower immediately. It landed on my belly like a signature sealed. In that second, I understood the new danger fully. He hadn't come for dinner. He came for me. And now he knew I carried his child inside. My fingers tightened over my apron, guarding everything fragile. How did my life get here tonight at all? What did he just realize, and what next now? I tasted metal, like fear had turned to coins. Sloane leaned closer to him, sensing the shift too. Her smile faltered, and she studied my face carefully. I wanted to disappear behind the column's flowers forever. Instead, I felt Damian's attention pin me down there. The room kept laughing, but my world went silent. I could already see the back hallway in mind. Kitchen doors, Office corner. Any place without lights, please. If I moved now, I might still breathe later. If I stayed, Damian would rewrite my future tonight. My feet finally obeyed, turning away from him slowly. I stepped back, one careful step, then another quietly. Behind me, silverware clinked like a countdown clock ticking. I didn't look back, but I felt him follow, and I knew my secret had just become his. I made it out of the dining room on instinct. The second Damian's eyes tracked from my face to my belly, the chandeliers above table 9 stopped looking warm and started looking like interrogation lights. I kept my smile on long enough to turn away, then I moved. I pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, fast enough to look busy. Heat and steam hit me. The air tasted like garlic and metal. Plates clattered, and my stomach lurched. I braced on the counter, then covered the bump again, as if my palm could erase what he'd seen. Jenna Ruiz caught my arm at the pass, eyes wide with concern. I didn't answer her with words. I couldn't. I let the truth spill inside my head. The man in the corner was my ex-husband, Damian Volkov, a name people treated like a superstition. The kitchen reacted anyway. A dishwasher slowed. A cook paused mid-scrape. No one asked questions. Everyone understood the vibe without hearing it. Do not get involved. Do not be seen standing beside the woman Damian Volkov recognized. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, and my first thought was Eli. 6 years old, waiting at Mrs. Lane's. My second thought was darker. If Damian had been watching me, had he been watching my son too? Rick Donnelly stormed in from the dining room, tie crooked, fear leaking through his manager posture. He wasn't built for real power, just for schedules. But tonight he looked like he'd been handed a live wire. He angled himself between me and the doors like that could change anything. He didn't need volume for me to feel the order. Damian wanted me now. Anger flared, then fear smothered it. A scene out front would mean witnesses who remembered my face, and maybe Eli's name. It would also be exactly the kind of mess Damian could reshape into a story where I looked unstable, and he looked reasonable. So I reached for the smallest lever I still had. I wasn't going back to the table. If he wanted me, he could have me in a room without an audience. I steered Rick toward the back office like it was my decision, even though my hands shook and my mouth tasted like pennies. Rick hesitated, then complied, because fear makes people helpful. He pushed me down the narrow corridor behind the kitchen. We passed linen shelves, the storeroom door, the staff lockers. Every step made my ankles throb. Every breath reminded me I was carrying a life that didn't deserve this chaos. The office was barely bigger than a closet, a desk crowded with invoices, a chair that looked uncomfortable on purpose. I closed the door, pressed my back to it for 1 second, and forced myself to breathe slow. For the baby. For Eli. For the version of me that once believed love could smooth sharp edges. The handle turned, and the room shrank. Damian stepped inside like he belonged to the building itself. He didn't slam the door. He didn't rush. His control was quiet and practiced. Cedar and smoke cologne drifted off him, a scent that used to mean nights on a skyline balcony and now meant trap. His suit was immaculate. His eyes were colder than I remembered, or maybe I was finally seeing them clearly. My body tried to betray me with memory. His hand at my lower back, his voice in the dark promising I was safe. Then my mind snapped back to reality. The blood-stained shirt, the late calls, the way safety had always been a bill I paid with silence. His gaze dropped to my stomach again, steady and measuring, like he was tallying what he owned. I fought the urge to fold inward. I kept my shoulders up. I reminded myself I left for survival, not for drama, and I wasn't here to beg for permission to breathe. I could feel him reading everything anyway. The uniform, the tired eyes, the hand that kept returning to my belly like a shield. Underneath it all, I felt that old truth. Damian didn't need to shout to be obeyed. He just had to decide. The door opened behind him. Sloane Mercer stood in the doorway in her crimson dress, irritation sharpening her face into something cruel. She wasn't surprised to see me. She was assessing me, measuring the uniform, the belly, the fact that I existed at all. In that instant, a quiet sting cut through my fear. Whatever story Damian sold her, it hadn't included the pregnant ex-wife serving dinner. Damian stayed unnervingly composed. He shifted just enough to block her view of me, then guided her back into the hallway with a calm that felt like a warning. The message hit me without words. Don't move. As he stepped out to manage her, I stared at the desk like it might turn into a map. My thoughts snapped to my locker, my purse, and Eli. Behind the closed door, Rick hovered, pale and shaking, and his fear had started to look like reluctant sympathy. If I was going to run, it had to be now, and it had to be from the back. Breath came shallow. I tucked chin, rehearsing the path. Lockers, purse, cellar stairs, alley rain. Somewhere outside this door, Damian's men would be watching. Rick's eyes flicked to the hallway, then back. Buying time tonight. Damian stepped out of the office with Sloane, and the hallway swallowed them like velvet. He did not need to look back. I felt the order in my ribs. Stay put, stay quiet, breathe like a good girl. In the kitchen, the clatter thinned, as if even the pans were listening. Jenna's eyes flicked toward the dining room, then away from me, like eye contact could become evidence. Servers moved with smaller steps. A cook avoided my side of the line. The restaurant was still open, but it suddenly belonged to him, and I was the mistake everyone wanted erased. Rick Donnelly hovered near the office door, hands shaking as he pretended to straighten receipts. When he leaned close, it was not authority I felt, but terror trying to sound practical. His face said he wanted me gone before Damian returned, understanding the price of delay. He guided me into the narrow corridor beside the dry storage, where the music from the dining room sounded far away. In his eyes I saw an old bruise, the kind grief leaves. He had a sister, he let me understand, who tried to leave a powerful man. She never made it. That warning sat between us like smoke. That story turned my stomach harder than the nausea. It was a mirror held too close, showing my face with a different ending. Rick swallowed, then offered a lifeline he looked ashamed to carry. A back exit through the wine cellar, a door the VIPs never noticed. To reach it, I needed Tino Alvarez in the kitchen, the one who knew which keys were real. Rick's fear shifted into something like mercy. He did not promise safety. He promised a chance. I nodded once, because hesitation was a luxury Damian owned. My hand found my belly, and I moved. I slipped into the staff area, past lockers and the sour scent of mop water. Every person I passed made themselves smaller. A hostess pretended to polish glass. A busser stared at the floor. No one wanted Damian Volkov to remember their kindness. I opened my locker with trembling fingers and grabbed my purse and phone, checking the time without letting my face change. Eli would be asking for me soon. I tucked a strand of hair under my cap and forced my breathing slow. How do you outrun a man who can buy the street you stand on tonight? Tino Alvarez stood at the prep counter, thick hands moving fast, eyes softer than the knives. Rick's message reached him before my words did. He watched the doorway once, then gave a quick nod that meant follow and do not drift. He threaded me through the kitchen's chaos, keeping his body between me and the main doors. I smelled basil, bleach, and fear. He stopped at a plain door I had always assumed was a pantry, and pushed it open. Cold air rolled out, and the sound of the restaurant muffled behind us, like a blanket over my head. Stairs dropped into the wine cellar, narrow and dim. Bottles lined the walls like silent witnesses. Tino flicked on a bare bulb and pointed to a metal door at the far end. In my mind, I repeated his directions as if they were scripture. Out to the alley, turn left, count 3 blocks, then right onto Maple. There would be a bus shelter near the transit stop, and the number 17 would take me out toward the main station. I did not ask how he knew. I just memorized. Because forgetting could be fatal. My hand stayed on my belly. I pushed the heavy door and stepped into the alley. Rain misted my hair instantly, cold and clean compared to kitchen grease. The lamp above the dumpster flickered like it was unsure I deserved light. For one breath, relief came, sharp and sweet, and then fear chased it down. My phone buzzed again in my purse, a vibration that felt like a leash tug. I did not check it. I could already picture Damian returning to that office, finding it empty, and deciding who would pay for my absence. I started walking, fast, counting blocks with my heartbeat in silence. The bus stop appeared like a small promise at the end of Maple. The shelter glass was scratched, and the bench was wet, but it was a plan. I checked the schedule with shaking hands and saw the wait. 15 minutes. Too long. My eyes swept the street the way prey watches brush. Headlights washed the pavement behind me, and I stepped deeper under the shelter, holding my purse tight. A sleek, black car rolled past at a slow pace, too quiet, too smooth. Tinted windows, shape, the kind of vehicle that never parks on the wrong street by accident. My stomach dropped as the car reached the corner and disappeared. Not speeding, not leaving, just circling. Was I already too late? The bus schedule in my hand suddenly felt like a death sentence. I imagined Damian's men scanning shelters, counting faces, waiting for my panic to make me obvious. Another headlights turned at the intersection, and I knew it was the same car coming back. I stepped out into the rain, abandoning the bench, choosing movement over hope. The only place I could think of that still smelled like peace was Street Bridget's church. I ran toward it now. The black car drifted past again, and my lungs locked shut under the shelter glass. Rain threaded my hair, and the bus schedule mocked my shaking hands for more minutes. I pictured Damian's men counting faces, learning routes, buying patience with silence until I moved. If I waited, I would be trapped inside headlights and decisions made by other people. So I left the stop, walking fast, choosing exposure over certainty, praying my shoes held. My feet throbbed, and nausea rose like tidewater behind my ribs, but I kept moving. Street Bridget's was 3 blocks away, the only door I trusted at night in storms. I had slipped into that church before, when loneliness became too loud for my walls. Tonight, I ran there like it was a hiding place for me and my children. The streetlights blurred, and my uniform clung cold against my skin as rain soaked everything. Behind me, tires whispered somewhere, and I refused to look back because fear feeds attention. My hand stayed over my belly, protecting what I couldn't explain aloud to anyone tonight. I kept seeing Eli's face, sleepy, trusting, waiting for me at Mrs. Lane's apartment upstairs. Mrs. Lane was my lifeline, my emergency contact, my unpaid miracle since I left Damian. If Damian reached Eli, my courage would turn into ash instantly, and I knew it. The church appeared between buildings, stone shoulders dark against the wet sky like guardian stone. I found the side door, just as I always had, and slipped inside without thinking. Sound dropped instantly, replaced by hush and the faint tick of candles in glass jars. Incense and old wood wrapped around me, warm as a borrowed blanket after rain outside. My shoes squeaked on stone, and I moved deeper toward the pews to hide shaking. I sank into a back pew, shoulders collapsing, throat tight with relief that hurt anyway. For a minute I just breathed, listening to my heart slow down beneath peace here. I pressed my palm to my belly and whispered apologies inwardly for running and stress. I promised the baby I would find a better world somehow, even if I crawled. Footsteps approached, soft and unhurried, and I tensed again until I recognized Father Callahan arriving. He looked older than ever, but his calm felt unchanged and real in storms still. He saw my uniform, my wet hair, my fear, and didn't flinch or details first. I didn't have strength for explanations, so I let truth spill slowly into his eyes. I told him, in my own mind, Damian Volkov had found me, and pregnant now. I added the part that mattered most. Eli was waiting, unprotected, except for Mrs. Lane. Father Callahan made it clear he understood power without asking names, and he feared it. He offered practical options, starting small, like a women's shelter contact far from River North. My mind rejected it immediately, because shelters had addresses and records that could be traced. I asked myself how to hide when someone owned the map and holds it too. Father Callahan shifted bigger, suggesting I leave the city entirely soon to a remote relative. He mentioned a trusted cousin on a ranch near Montana's emptier roads where light's scarce. The idea made me dizzy, like oxygen finally returned to my chest after months tight. Then reality answered. I had maybe $300 saved from tips and a maxed card already. I could barely afford diapers, let alone tickets and a new start for 2 children. Father Callahan reminded me the church kept emergency funds for real need, and this counted. Hope flickered, fragile as candlelight, and I clung to it with both hands inside me. My phone vibrated again, and the sound felt obscene in that hush like a siren. I pulled it out, expecting Eli's caregiver, but saw Damian's name burning on my screen. The message implied he knew my location and offered forgiveness like poison if I returned. My relief collapsed, and my skin went cold under the damp fabric as dread rose. I showed Father Callahan, and his calm tightened into urgent focus without losing kindness, though. He reached for a phone somewhere, but my attention snapped to doors at entrance front. The heavy church doors shifted, wood groaning softly, like the building sighed at storm again. I heard footsteps echo, measured and confident, and my stomach turned because confidence meant Damian. My hand clamped over my belly, and I tasted panic like copper in my throat. Sanctuary was cracking, and I realized there might be no roots left for tonight alone. Father Callahan stepped beside me, steady as oak, still protecting my dignity even as fear. I stared down the aisle, watching candlelight tremble on stone pillars, and waited for impact. If Damian entered, it would be with calm, not chaos, and that terrified me most. I thought of Eli again, and my heart begged time to stretch just long enough. Outside, rain kept falling, indifferent, while inside my life held its breath for what came. My phone sat heavy in my palm, proof that peace was never private around Damian. The footsteps grew closer, and the church air seemed to thin as if bracing too. I wanted to run, but my legs refused, anchored by pregnancy and fear and faith. Then the doors opened wider, and I knew part 5 had begun before blinking once. The doors of Street Bridges opened wider, and the rain smell rushed in. Footsteps crossed the threshold with the kind of patience that never belongs to lost people. Damian Volkov stepped into the nave like he had paid for the stone itself, coat dark, hair dry, eyes steady. 2 men followed a pace behind him. Not loud, not threatening, just placed one drifting toward the side aisle, the other pausing near the main doors. Candlelight kept flickering, but the air felt heavier, as if even prayer had to make room. My lungs tightened, and I knew the sanctuary was not mine. Father Callahan moved first, slow and deliberate, placing his body between me and the aisle. The gesture wasn't dramatic. It was simply human, the way you shield a child from a loud room. I stayed in the pew, fingers digging into worn wood, palm pressed over my belly. The baby felt suddenly real, a heartbeat depending on my choices. Eli's face flashed in my mind, his small hands clutching my old hoodie at bedtime. If Damian decided to punish anyone tonight, he wouldn't stop at me. He could reach every soft place I loved. That was the terror underneath everything. Damian's voice, when it came, stayed low and smooth, almost respectful of the echoes. He didn't have to raise it. The whole city had been trained to listen. I could feel him presenting a story for the room. Pregnant wife overwhelmed, a man collecting his family, a private matter that didn't need witnesses. He kept his hands visible, his posture calm, as if he were the reasonable one, and my fear was the problem. I hated how effective that mask could be. Even here, holiness didn't erase power. It only made it quieter. I could almost hear the doors locking. I tracked the men without looking directly at them, watching reflections in glass and the angle of their shoulders. One stood where the side door used to feel friendly. The other leaned near the main entrance, close enough to stop anyone without touching them. Damian had turned the church into a room with controlled exits, the same way he turned my marriage into a room with controlled choices. My throat tightened with anger, then softened into calculation. Running would mean a chase through rain with a pregnant body and a target on my back. Staying meant surrender. Neither was freedom. I watched Father Callahan hold his ground, and my guilt flared hotter than fear. He was not part of my marriage, not part of my escape. Yet he stood there anyway. Because faith makes some people brave. Damian's calm made it worse. He didn't need to threaten. He only had to imply consequences, and everyone in Chicago would fill in the details. I imagined the church audited, Father Callahan harassed, his kindness turned into a liability. What does freedom mean if everyone who helps you gets punished? My mind started bargaining. Give Damian tonight, and buy time for tomorrow instead. I stood up, hands open, showing I wasn't reaching for anything. My knees trembled, but I made my face steady, the way I did for Eli when he woke from nightmares. I let Father Callahan see my decision before he could protest. I was choosing time. I was choosing to remove him from the blast zone. I told myself I could survive a car ride, a night under Damian's roof, more time in a cage, if it meant the people who helped me stayed breathing. Was I choosing surrender or choosing space to plan? I prayed it was the second. Damian's expression barely shifted, but I felt satisfaction settle in the space between us. He moved closer, not grabbing, just occupying the distance so my options narrowed again. One of his men angled aside to clear the aisle, polite as a doorman. Father Callahan's shoulders sagged with helpless anger, and I wanted to apologize for dragging danger into his sanctuary. I turned my head once, memorizing his face, because I didn't know what Damian might do after I left. I pressed thanks into the silence like a candle offered back. Then I stepped toward Damian, because the alternative was worse. Together we moved down the aisle, my wet shoes whispering on stone. The doors opened, and cold air slapped my cheeks, mixing incense with exhaust. Outside, a black car waited at the curb, glossy as oil under the street lamp. Luxury, polished and silent, the kind that always comes with conditions. Damian guided me with a hand near my elbow, careful enough to look considerate, firm enough to be ownership. I saw his men watching the sidewalk, scanning corners, controlling the world the way they controlled the church. The invisible cage rebuilt itself around me with every step into the rain. As I slid into the back seat, my body shook with adrenaline and fatigue. Damian's presence filled the space beside me, calm as if the night had corrected a mistake. I kept my hands folded, hiding the tremble. And I kept my mind on Eli, on tomorrow, on any phone Damian couldn't hear. I reminded myself I had escaped once with panic and luck. Next time would be different. Next time I would leave with money, documents, and a real route. The door shut, and the city became a blurred cage rolling toward his penthouse. I breathed, ready for locks. Rain slid down my sleeves as Damian guided me to the black car waiting at the curb. The street looked normal, yet every reflection felt watched. I climbed in, and the door shut with a soft seal that sounded final. Leather swallowed the city noise, warm and expensive, and my wet uniform smelled out of place. Ambient lights glowed along the floor like a private hallway. Damian sat close enough that his calm became another wall. I kept my hands folded over my belly, breathing slowly, asking myself why comfort felt more terrifying than the rain outside the church doors. Through tinted glass, I saw Chicago smear into watercolor, streetlights stretching as we moved. The car glided as if it never touched potholes, and that ease made me feel smaller. My phone vibrated in my purse, but I didn't dare check it, not with Damian beside me. I watched his profile instead, the same sharp line I once kissed in a penthouse mirror, and I felt grief harden into caution. When we turned onto the riverfront route I knew too well, my stomach dropped. We were not heading to safety. We were heading to his address, to my old cage. The building rose ahead, glass and steel like a promise from another life. Damian stepped out first, and an umbrella appeared from nowhere, held by a doorman who treated him like a quiet king. I followed, shoes squeaking on marble, and every security camera felt like an eye that never blinked. People nodded politely, respectful, even friendly, because here Damian was a businessman with charity photos and tailored suits. No one saw the fear under my skin. The private elevator waited, key access hidden in Damian's hand. As the doors closed, the city disappeared, and the trap clicked shut tonight. The elevator opened straight into the penthouse foyer. Just like before, no hallway, no neighbors, no accidental witnesses. Cream walls, cold marble, and a skyline that pretended to be freedom. Nothing had changed since I left, and that was the point. Damian had kept the space like a museum exhibit labeled with my name. I remembered standing here in a silk robe, laughing at some private joke, believing I was chosen. That memory flashed and burned out, replaced by the night I packed a bag and ran. I brushed the console table, too clean, and knew he'd been waiting anyway. He drifted into the kitchen nook, opening water, gesturing to food, acting almost normal. On anyone else, it would have looked like care. On Damian, it felt like strategy. A soft rope instead of a chain. He wanted me tired, fed, and predictable, so I would stop thinking about exits. My anger wobbled with fatigue, and I hated that he noticed. I kept my face flat and my thoughts on Eli, my son, age 6, sleeping at Mrs. Lane's. When Damian suggested rest, I heard the real line underneath. "I have you again. I asked for the guest room tonight." Damian paused, then let me go, and his permission felt like a leash. I crossed to the guest room and closed the door, breathing for the first time since the church. The space was spotless, untouched, as if my leaving had been a brief glitch. Minutes later, Irina appeared with soup, her face set in practical stone. She didn't comfort me. She measured my belly and the future inside it. In her world, the baby was an heir for Damian, not a life for me. After she left, silence returned, and the penthouse felt like a velvet cell around me. I sat on the bed and watched the skyline glitter, too perfect to trust. Somewhere else, Mrs. Lane was settling Eli, my son, age 6, and I couldn't check without risking Damian seeing. The helplessness hurt more than my feet. I tried to pretend Damian would keep his hunt personal, but he never did anything small. He didn't need threats. His attention was the threat. I swallowed a few bites of soup for the baby and set the tray aside. Then I listened to the hallway, to footsteps that came and paused, as if someone was counting breaths behind my door. My purse buzzed, a small sound that made my heart leap. I expected another message from Damian, another reminder that he could find door. Instead, an unknown number lit the screen with a note tied to Father Callahan, a relative far from Chicago, in a place with roads and fewer eyes. The message said help existed when I was ready, and it warned me to delete it. My hands shook as I memorized the digits, repeating them like a prayer. Then I erased the text, wiping proof, because proof could become a weapon in Damian's world. Hope still flickered. I lay back and pictured Wyoming or Montana as a far dot beyond Chicago's reach. Then I pictured my phone being watched, and the hope tightened into caution. I couldn't call anyone openly. Not from this device, not from this room. That meant patience and planning, 2 things fear hates. I repeated the out-of-city number until it stuck, then locked it in memory. I slid my purse under the bed and turned my phone face down. The penthouse hummed softly, like hidden machinery. It was beautiful, and it was not mine. Tonight I would act calm and watch everything. I woke before dawn in the guest room, not because I was rested, but because silence here had edges. The air smelled like clean linen and expensive wood polish, and every faint sound felt scheduled. Somewhere beyond my door, a soft step paused, then moved on, as if someone was checking that I still existed. I lay still, one hand on my belly, the other on the seam of my purse under the bed. I counted breaths, then footsteps, then the seconds between them, trying to learn the pattern. If the walls were listening, I needed to listen first, too. When I finally opened the door, the penthouse looked like a magazine spread that forgot people had feelings. Damian was already up, calm in dark clothes, reading on a tablet at the island. Steam rose from a mug near his hand, and the quiet order of it made my skin crawl. He glanced at me the way he used to, like he was taking inventory, then shifted into routines that could pass for kindness. A cup of tea appeared in front of me, a breakfast plate set out, as if last night in the church had been a misunderstanding today. Then I noticed the shopping bags lined neatly on the counter, the kind with thick rope handles and labels I used to recognize from his world. He had them placed like gifts, but they felt like evidence. Inside were soft sweaters, a blue dress, new shoes, all in my size and all in the colors Damian preferred on me. Not my thrift store jacket, not the jeans I wore to walk Eli to school, not anything that belonged to the life I built without him. It was my body, recast as his wife again, styled for his story everywhere always. The worst part wasn't the clothes. It was what they implied when Damian calmly mentioned, through the way he moved, that his men had visited my apartment. My tiny place on the east side, the one with the peeling paint and the squeaky radiator, had been opened like a drawer. Mrs. Lane had a spare key for emergencies, and my mind pictured her small hands trembling as strangers asked for it. Eli had been there. My son had been there. If he could step into my home like it was his, what else was he already inside? I hated that. Anger rose hot, then collapsed into humiliation, because I couldn't yell, couldn't slam doors, couldn't demand privacy like normal people do. Damian's calm dared me to act irrational, to prove his unspoken claim that I was unstable and he was steady. I forced my voice to stay quiet in my own head, and reminded myself why I ran. Survival. Not romance, not drama, just air. I thought of Eli again, 6-year-old and trusting, and I felt my spine straighten. Gratitude would be a leash. I refused it. Damian didn't argue. He didn't have to. The way he stood there in that bright kitchen told me he decided what was real. My separation was, in his mind, a childish detour. My job at Luna Verdi was a phase. My apartment was a storage unit he could unlock. Even my pregnancy was a document he had finally seen, a signature on a contract he believed existed. He didn't ask how I survived. He acted as if my survival was proof I belonged under his roof again. The gentleness was control, and it scared me, because it sounded like home. That was when the real punch landed. Not from anything he said, but from what he didn't deny. He knew my address. He knew my neighbor. He knew where I worked, which meant Luna Verdi wasn't a coincidence, and his surprise at Table 9 was a performance for everyone watching. He hadn't found me. He had me cataloged, filed, updated, ready. He could have taken me from my apartment months ago, before I even knew I was pregnant. The slack he gave me wasn't freedom. It was a leash with room to wander until he pulled. Now he tightened it. My phone sat on the counter like a planted bug, and I treated it that way. I stopped thinking in bursts of panic and started thinking in lists. Eli, the baby, documents, cash, keys, witnesses. I needed to hide the out-of-city number somewhere Damian's habits wouldn't touch. Not in contacts, not in messages, not in anything he could skim. I folded the number into memory again, then into a note I tucked behind a loose thread in my jewelry pouch. How do you plan an escape when the walls are listening? You plan like sound is a report. I looked at the skyline and caught my reflection in the glass, pale and dressed in clothes he picked. Damian watched from the kitchen with a patience that felt planned. I sensed the next tightening. He would need me visible, smiling, proof to his world that the household was whole again. Public perception was another lock. I practiced a neutral face and stored my anger where it could not leak. Irina moved quietly in the background, and even her silence felt like a rule. I told myself the same thing, over and over. Play along, observe, and survive the night. By late morning, Damian was already shaping the day like a schedule he owned. In the kitchen, he moved with quiet certainty, and I understood before anything was explained. He wanted me seen. A charity gala at the Meridian Grand Hotel, River North's brightest room, would welcome me back after my time away. In his world, absence becomes rumor, and rumor becomes weakness. He needed cameras to record a corrected story. Maya Hart returned, pregnant, calm, and beside Damian Volkov. My stomach tightened. Reputation was another lock, polished until it looked like love, and I could feel the door closing. I nodded on the outside, because my choices were being watched. But inside I started listing needs the way I used to list grocery prices. Cash hidden where men don't search. Copies of Eli's birth certificate and school paperwork. A second phone that never touches this penthouse Wi-Fi. A route that doesn't rely on bus schedules or mercy. I could not call Father Callahan's contact number. Not from this device. Not under Damian's ceiling. If I ran loud, someone else would bleed for it. So I planned small. Observe shifts, memorize guard routines, and keep my face boring all day. The proof of consequences arrived in fragments, the way bad weather rolls in before the storm line shows. Jenna Ruiz texted from an unknown number, not asking for help, just saying she'd been taken off the schedule at Luna Verdi without explanation. Mrs. Lane called and sounded shaken, mentioning 2 security guys who'd asked polite questions about my comings and goings. Father Callahan's voicemail, earlier warm, now carried a careful stiffness, like he was speaking with someone standing nearby. No one blamed Damian out loud. They didn't have to. I recognized the pattern. Compliance protected the people I loved most. That afternoon, Irina appeared with a velvet box held flat on her palms, as if it weighed more than jewelry should. Inside lay a sapphire necklace, deep blue and painfully bright, set in cold metal that caught every stray light. I remembered gifts from Damian that once felt like celebration. This was branding. The necklace wasn't meant for me. It was meant for cameras, judges, donors, anyone who might wonder where his wife had been. Heavy stones, heavy message, claimed returned, carrying his heir. When I lifted it, the chill traveled into my skin like a warning today. A stylist arrived mid-afternoon, hands quick, voice professional, eyes trained to ignore panic. She pinned my hair into something elegant, swept concealer under my eyes, and smoothed a dress over my growing belly as if my body were a centerpiece. I watched in the mirror and barely recognized the woman forming in layers of polish. Maya the waitress, Maya the mom, Maya who counts change for Eli's lunch, faded behind this glossy version. Damian liked this version because it matched his story. I let her work, not because I agreed, but because I needed access to the room's rhythm tonight. When she stepped away to pack, I asked for something tiny, the kind no one suspects, a safety pin. My strap felt loose. I explained in the most ordinary way possible. She produced one without thinking, and I thanked her like it was nothing. The moment she left, I slid it into a hidden seam inside the dress, pressing the point against fabric until I felt it catch. It wasn't a weapon. It was agency. A tool to cut a thread, pick a lock, mark a door. In Damian's house, small wins were the only wins that didn't get punished. Irina returned later with the necklace again, and this time her composure slipped for a heartbeat. Her eyes darted down the hall, checking for ears. The meaning she offered wasn't comfort. It was caution. The woman from the restaurant, Sloane Mercer, had asked questions about Damian's business, about his friends, about things a fiancé shouldn't need to know. Irina implied that curiosity had consequences, that Sloane had not gone on a glamorous trip, no matter what Damian claimed. My scalp prickled. If Sloane didn't leave for Paris, where did she go? I stopped breathing until Irina straightened and became stone. By early evening, I stood in front of the mirror, fully dressed, the sapphire resting at my throat like a cold hand. The dress hid my bump just enough to make strangers unsure, which I knew was the point. Damian would decide when the city learned I was pregnant, because he wanted the announcement to sound like victory. I practiced a soft smile that didn't reach my eyes and reminded myself this was reconnaissance, not surrender. I would watch who approached him, who avoided him, who looked afraid. Reputation builds cages, but people still slip. Tonight I needed one crack. Down the hall, the penthouse held its breath for the show. I tucked the safety pin deeper, checked my purse for the notepad where I'd hidden that out-of-city number, and forced my hands steady. Eli's face anchored me, and I promised him silently that I would come back. Damian waited by the door, calm and certain. I stepped beside him anyway, because I was buying time. I would wear the necklace, walk into the Meridian Grand Hotel, and let the cameras believe his story. While everyone smiled, I would watch exits, watchers, and the first person brave enough to blink. At the curb of the Meridian Grand Hotel, The Bentley stopped like it owned the lane. Camera flashes hit the windows before the door even opened, impatient. Damian stepped out first, perfect in black, then offered his hand as if I were a treasured guest instead of a woman bracing for impact. The sapphire at my throat felt colder outside, heavier under the lights, a blue weight meant for headlines. I fixed my smile in place and walked beside him, hearing my own heels on the carpet like a countdown. How many smiles does it take to hide a hostage? Inside, warmth and perfume wrapped around me. Chandeliers threw soft gold across tuxedos, gowns, and trays of champagne that drifted like bait. A string quartet played something gentle. But my nerves heard only surveillance. The pause of a security guard, the angle of a waiter's shoulder, the tiny cameras tucked in corners. Damian's palm settled at my lower back, guiding me through the entrance as donors turned to look, their smiles eager to be seen near him. I scanned for service corridors, side doors, anything that didn't funnel back to Damian. Every exit felt visible. Every step felt quietly measured. The first wave of greetings came fast, polished voices and practiced laughter that never reached eyes. People praised Damian's generosity, asked after my absence, and spoke as if our marriage were a public institution they helped maintain. I answered with vague, harmless details, the kind that could not be checked, while my stomach rolled under the dress. A judge clasped Damian's arm like a friend. A city commissioner leaned in close, smiling too wide. I recognized the ease of influence, the way doors open when everyone believes you hold the keys. Their warmth wasn't kindness. It was proximity to power. Damian kept me moving, never letting any conversation linger long enough for me to breathe. Each time my smile faltered, his fingers tightened, a subtle correction hidden behind courtesy. The sapphire necklace dragged on my collarbone, reminding me that cameras loved symbols more than truth. I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirrored column. Hair perfect, makeup flawless, belly almost invisible, and eyes that looked older than last week. If I ran, alarms would scream, not from doors but from reputations. Irina's warning echoed like a cold draft. Questions can make people vanish. I kept walking, pretending I belonged. That was when I noticed her. A woman in a simple black dress, no jewels, no hunger for the spotlight. She didn't angle her body toward Damian like everyone else. She watched the room the way I did, with quiet math, and when her eyes met mine, they didn't soften. Detective Claire Bennett. I remembered reading the name on a charity program from years ago, a line item no one cared about then. Now her presence felt deliberate, like a pin pressed into fabric to see where it tears. Why did she look at me like she knew my secret? She approached with the kind of calm that doesn't ask permission. Up close, she looked mid-30s, tired in a disciplined way, like someone who sleeps with her phone on the pillow. Her attention flicked to the necklace, then to my belly, then back to my face, quick and clinical. She didn't congratulate me. She didn't flatter Damian. She let a silence hang that made my pulse stumble. I could feel a question in the air, not spoken, just offered. Are you safe, or are you staged? My mouth went dry as I weighed what a nod might cost right now. Damian appeared at my side as if he'd been listening through my skin. His hand slid to my waist, gentle enough for onlookers, firm enough for me. He greeted her with smooth familiarity, the kind powerful men use when they want to sound cooperative while drawing a line. I watched Claire's expression stay neutral as he spoke, and I felt the warning in his timing more than his words. The message was simple. This woman is dangerous to our story. His thumb pressed once against my side, a private punctuation mark, and my smile froze harder while music kept playing. I needed air, and the safest excuse in a room like this was the restroom. I told myself it was just a pause, a chance to breathe, but my body knew it was escape practice. Damian's grip loosened only after he scanned the crowd, and even then I felt a watcher detach from the wall to follow my path. I moved through clusters of laughter and perfume, past trays of champagne, past a corridor marked staff that I couldn't risk. Every step away from Damian felt like stepping off a ledge, expecting a hand to yank me back at once. The hallway toward the women's room was quieter, carpet muffling sound, lights softer, like the hotel was trying to imitate peace. I passed a mirror and saw the sapphire flash at my throat, bright as a beacon, and I hated that it made me easier to find. Behind me, I sensed footsteps matching mine. Not rushing, not hiding. I didn't turn, because turning would confirm fear. Irina's warning and Sloane's shadow pressed into my thoughts, and Detective Claire Bennett's gaze replayed like a signal. Something was about to shift from theater to private danger, and I was walking into it. The women's restroom felt like a pocket of cold air carved out of velvet noise. Marble counters shone under soft lights, and the faucets ran like steady little lies. I braced my palms on the stone, breathed through my nose, and tried to slow my heart without letting my face give anything away. The sapphire at my throat pressed into my skin, heavy as a warning. Outside the door, the ballroom's music seeped in, distant and cheerful. I knew I wasn't alone, even here. Someone always watched the hallway. I could feel Damian's attention traveling through walls, searching for cracks. I dabbed at my lipstick with a tissue I didn't need, just to look normal, just to buy a second. Then the door opened, and Detective Claire Bennett slipped inside, moving like she'd learned how to enter rooms without announcing herself. She didn't head for a mirror. She checked the stalls, the ceiling corners, the hallway gap, and her eyes met mine with a message that didn't require sound. Time was short. I felt my stomach drop. If she followed me here, someone could have followed her. I kept my hands and listened to the water, pretending it was privacy. Without raising her voice, she let me understand she wasn't here for charity. She was on a new task force built for men like Damian, and they were stacking evidence brick by brick. She named the clean crimes first money washing through shell companies, fake invoices, donations that doubled as shields. Then she moved to the uglier patterns. Intimidation disguised as business disputes, people pressured into silence, witnesses who changed their stories overnight. The darkest allegation hovered at the edge of her meaning, and my lungs tightened as if the word itself could bruise my baby. I believed her. I'd seen. Then she mentioned Sloane Mercer, and the restroom seemed to tilt. I'd been told Sloane was a pretty replacement, a woman flown in to fill my absence, a ring and a honeymoon plan meant to sting. Claire made it clear that story was a costume. Sloane had been feeding the task force information, tracing names, movements, accounts, trying to map Damian's shadow from the inside. 3 days ago, she stopped answering. No flight records to Paris, no social media trail, just a sudden blank. Irina's warning snapped into place, and my hands went cold. If Sloane vanished, what chance remained? Claire didn't promise miracles. She offered a corridor, narrow and dangerous, where I might leave with Eli and still breathe. Protection could mean safe housing, new names, people between Damian and my kids, but it required my cooperation. She needed what I knew, what I'd overheard, what I could confirm about his routines and his money. The ask landed like metal in my mouth. If Damian found out, the consequences wouldn't stop at me. Jenna, Father Callahan, Mrs. Lane, even Eli's school could become pressure points. Hope and terror arrived together, inseparable. A lifeline or a death sentence for us. Footsteps sounded in the hall, and the door eased open again. A woman in a red gown entered, humming, checking her hair, unaware she'd walked into my breaking point. Claire shifted instantly, turning on the faucet like she'd only come in to wash her hands. I followed her lead, staring at my reflection as if the biggest thing in my life was mascara. The stranger moved to a stall, and the air held its breath. I could feel how easy it would be for one glance, one whisper, to reach Damian. Even water running felt loud. My pulse kept time. When the stall door clicked shut, Claire's hand moved with practiced economy. A small card slid across the marble as if it were nothing, just paper. I trapped it under my palm, then folded it into the hidden pocket where my safety pin waited, both of them pressed against my ribs like secrets with sharp edges. Claire finished at the sink, composed again, and left without looking back. I stood there alone, necklace cold, throat tight. I memorized the choice I'd just been given. I had an out-of-city number and a path. Both might save us. Both might kill us. I waited until the woman in red left, then stepped into the hallway as if nothing had happened. The music swelled as I walked back, and my face rebuilt a smile before the ballroom doors. The card in my pocket felt hot through fabric, a small fuse against my skin. Damian saw me right away. His gaze checked my eyes, my breathing, my hands near my belly. He didn't accuse me. He didn't have to. His attention was the accusation. I moved back to his side, and the performance continued. But the game had changed inside me. Forever. Starting tonight. Every laugh sounded rehearsed, and I held 2 exits in my head like keys I might drop. The church contact promised distance, a remote place where Damian's reach might thin out. But it meant running blind and hoping no one else paid for it. Claire's offer promised structure, safe rooms, paperwork, a shield with training, but it required me to testify against the man who still controlled my life. I pictured Eli asleep, trusting the world. I pictured Jenna off the schedule, and Father Callahan choosing his words. One route was disappearance, the other was war. I had to choose. Damian's hand returned to my back as the auction began, and I understood he wanted me close all night. He looked pleased with my smile, pleased with the sapphire catching light, pleased with the room accepting his story. I stayed beside him, clapping when others clapped, hearing my blood louder than the music. The card and the safety pin pressed into my ribs, reminders that my life depended on hidden things. When the applause rose, I smiled wider and promised myself I would not waste what I'd learned. The walls were closing in. I needed a plan. Stakes would rise. By the time the last auction paddle lowered, my smile felt glued on. Damian's hand stayed at my back as we moved through the lobby like we owned it, cameras trading flash for silence. Outside, Chicago rain misted the curb, turning the streetlights into halos that didn't feel holy at all. The car door opened, and the inside smelled like leather and expensive calm. I slid in, sapphire cold at my throat, and watched the hotel shrink behind tinted glass, wondering how a night can end and still not be over. Damian sat close, satisfied, as if applause followed us. The ride back to River North was smooth enough to trick the body, but my nerves refused the comfort. Every turn was familiar, every light a checkpoint I used to pass in gowns that meant something different. The tower rose ahead, and the doorman's respectful nod landed like a stamp on paperwork. In the private elevator, the hush felt engineered, and I could almost hear my own thoughts echoing off chrome. The penthouse doors opened on the same skyline, the same marble, the same staged perfection, and I understood. Nothing here had ever been temporary. Never for him, not me. Damian's mood was almost gentle, the way a handler speaks to an animal that finally stopped fighting. He looked pleased with the evening's proof, with the necklace catching light, with my belly hidden just enough to be a promise and not a headline. As we crossed the foyer, he made it clear the guest room was a pause, not a choice. Tomorrow, he expected me back in the master bedroom, framed as family, framed as health, framed as what a good mother should accept. I nodded because nodding kept oxygen in the room, and because I needed one night alone. In the guest room, I peeled off the gown like it belonged to another woman, then set the sapphire necklace in its box as carefully as if it could bite. The silence was thick, broken by distant footsteps and the hum of the city below. I pulled Detective Claire Bennett's card from my hidden pocket, feeling the edges imprint my fingertips. My phone sat on the nightstand, untrustworthy. I pictured Damian's reach inside it, inside my messages, inside my contacts. I could not call anyone from that device. I could think, and thinking felt like balancing on glass all night. Two lifelines sat in my head like competing prayers. Father Callahan's out-of-city contact meant running with Eli and disappearing into wide land where Damian's name might fade. But it also meant traveling blind, trusting strangers, and dragging my son into another sudden goodbye. Claire's route meant protection with rules, safe houses, paperwork, and the promise of a case. But it required me to step into the open and point at the man who still controlled our air. Either choice risked Eli's normal life. I pressed my palm to my belly and asked what kind of mother I was right now. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet settle into my bones. For a moment, I imagined Eli's small hands on my cheeks, the way he looked at me when he needed reassurance, and I almost broke. Then, under my palm, something fluttered. At first, I thought it was my pulse, or nerves, or hunger, but it came again, deliberate, unmistakable. A tiny insistence from inside me, like a question asked in a language older than fear. I breathed out, tears silent, because that kick turned my panic into purpose. I wasn't surviving. I was protecting. I whispered promises into the dim room without letting sound become evidence. I promised Eli I would come back to him whole. I promised this baby I would not let anyone treat their life like a bargaining chip. Damian could demand bedrooms and appearances and obedience, but he could not demand my consent in my own mind. If I had to nod today to keep everyone safe, then nodding was not surrender. It was strategy. I would watch his patterns, learn his schedule, note the faces that guarded doors, and gather every small fact that could turn into an opening. I opened the jewelry box and stared at the velvet tray like it was a map. Beneath the lining, there was a narrow seam where fabric met wood, the kind of detail no one notices unless they need to hide a life. I slipped Claire's card into that seam, pressed it flat, and covered it with the sapphire's box, making the hiding place look like vanity instead of survival. The safety pin stayed in my pocket, small and ridiculous, but it reminded me that tiny tools matter. Then I lay back and listened for footsteps, counting the seconds between them. People talk about control like it's loud, like it arrives with slammed doors and raised voices. Tonight I learned real control can be quiet. It can be a hand guiding you through cameras, a necklace that tells strangers you belong to someone, kindness that doubles as surveillance. But love can be quiet too, and still be stronger. Love is the part of me that keeps choosing tomorrow for Eli and this baby, even when tonight feels impossible. The next chapter won't be about running. It will be about moving with purpose and making Damian underestimate me for as long needed. If you've ever had to smile while your heart was screaming, you understand more than you think. Maybe you've never faced a man like Damian, but you've faced pressure that tried to rename your choices and call it love. I'm telling my story because someone out there is counting steps in a hallway, wondering if it's hopeless. It isn't. Sometimes the bravest thing is buying time, protecting others, and planning in secret until the opening is real. Episode. I start testing limits of his watch and choosing which lifeline to trust. Like, share, and comment what you would choose.